Is it the end of music as we know it? It seems like every day there's something new about AI music, and it's happening so quickly. It's taking so many people by complete surprise. Music, as we know it, is under attack.
Artificial intelligence is moving in on that very human element of making music.
And most of us don't even realize how quickly this is all changing.
And it's hard to tell what's real and what's not.
The clip that I'm about to show you was a little bit disturbing, and I'll explain why, because I'm a musician, right? So I thought after seeing this that that's it. All musicians are toast, that's the end, and 30 years of my music career out the window. But see for yourself and let me know what you think. I was really freaked out when I saw this. It shows a bystander listening to AI music and what she thought of what she heard.
If you listen to this on the radio, would you care if it's AI or not?
I'm gonna go with no.
So in my research, I decided I had to go right back to the beginning. How did all of this come about? It didn't just happen overnight. It was something that took a while. So I decided to go with my research and go right back to the beginning. So how did we get here? How did we get to this point? It hasn't just been a overnight thing. This has obviously been going on for a little while. And what's actually happening as these changes take place? Let's rewind. The music that we listen to has, over the last century, been greatly influenced by how technology has advanced. So let's take, for example, the fact that we can even listen to music. So that was influenced by our ability to record music and then play it back through a device like a gramophone. And then later the radio, we were able to transmit that music to thousands, millions of people. And then it evolved even more with better recording techniques, the rise of digital audio, and then eventually streaming. Which brings us all the way to the 2020s, when now through the likes of Logic Pro or Ableton or Fruity Loops, bedroom producers can now make very high quality music for very little money in their own bedrooms. So I've been a musician for, a really long time. I started out with a, recording studio in my study, and I sort of built it up from there into a pretty professional outfit. And look, there was a barrier of entry, and now with just how cheap things are, you can actually get some pretty decent results with not a lot of money. But if you want to get good, it requires skill and patience and a lot of training, right? Yeah. I'm sure, like many other musicians, we're really thinking hard about all of that invested time, energy, and effort, and whether it's worthwhile anymore. I mean, one thing that does strike me as quite interesting is there's still a truckload of money out there when it comes to the total size of the pie. Like when you look at the music industry, it is quite big, and it's growing every year. I'm super confident that when we look back on this time, we're going to realize it was the pinnacle of human creativity in music. Notice how I said the word human. I think a lot about the word human. I mean, for me, I thought it couldn't get more human than to make music, because it's something that as humans we share. We make connections through music. The question is all of that gone? Are we now pretty much outsourcing our ability to create music to machines? About 2 or 3 years ago, we first started seeing AI appear through what we call music plugins. The concept of plugins isn't new. Well, auto-tune is a plugin that enables you to tune the vocals so that they sound in pitch and in key. But these new plugins enabled you to completely alter the sound of, say, a voice and make it sound completely different, or add instruments that hadn't been actually played, leveraging the power of artificial intelligence. There's an argument going around that AI is exactly the same as some of the algorithms that we've used in plugins to regulate things like effects and reverb and other things like that. But I think it really does take it to another level because, when it comes to AI, you can literally completely change your voice. You can make yourself sound like something or someone that you aren't. And I don't know, it just kind of feels deceptive. But the question is, if I need a vocalist as a backing singer and it's deep down in the mix, is that allowed? It was right around this time that this website popped up called AI for Music. And it was an initiative that was created to promote the ethical and responsible use of artificial intelligence. It also laid out a set of principles for music creation with AI designed to really help guide the industry around how best to leverage AI and almost like some ethical pointers. These principles, in a way, were kind of strange because they were sponsored by music industry players. I guess they knew that it was only a matter of time before AI music generation was to really come and disrupt the music industry as we know it. I was fishy about this part. Why would all of these really big companies like Universal Music Group and others kind of feel that they needed to set some rules around this? Kind of smacks a little bit of regulatory capture. If you don't know what that is, it's basically when industry goes and tries to shape policies of government using lobbyists and things like that in order to keep people out by setting the rules before anyone else. And I don't know, when I first saw this, it kind of smacked a little bit of that. Enter the AI music generation platforms. So that was the likes of Suno, Udio, 11 Labs Music, and many, many others that really focused in on generating music from end to end without the need of any musicians. So literally you could enter a prompt in and it would create whatever music you wanted it to based on the prompt. Clearly it's with these AI music generators that a lot of the conflict and we can call it disruption has occurred in the music industry. Initially there was a lot of positivity from musicians about this new capability. In fact, like Grimes and David Guetta and a number of others actually jumped on the bandwagon, and in fact Paul McCartney used AI to finish one of the Beatles' unfinished songs and released that at the time. In fact, there were a number of producers like Rick Rubin and also Timbaland, Rick famously calling AI the punk rock of coding. So there was a lot of positivity right at the start. So there was a lot of TikTok memes, different remakes like remaking Nirvana songs, a bit of controversy around people cloning Drake's voice and releasing songs that weren't Drake or Ariana Grande. Yeah, so that started to really cause a little bit of concern early on. Then of course Spotify, the largest music streaming platform, weighed in on the discussion, saying what a great thing it was going to be for musicians and for listeners. They were going to get a much bigger selection. It wasn't going to be a threat to the music industry, but instead a tool for creatives to create more content on the platform. Daniel Ek, the CEO, really pushed a vote out saying how positive AI was going to be both for listeners and creatives. Timbaland also came out quite strongly. Turned out he was actually an ambassador for Suno, one of the AI music platforms. He came out saying people should start to follow his lead when it comes to creating AI content. When I saw all these kind of big producers jumping on the bandwagon, especially Timbaland with Suno, I was worried. It's not that I don't trust producers. I've been a producer myself. It's more, I guess, that they're very commercially driven. And so Timbaland being such a big hit maker, when he started to do this, I kind of felt there was something going on. It felt a bit fishy, right? Some strange stuff started to happen with Timbaland announcing Tata, his AI artist that he wanted to push and promote, and that wasn't really that well received. We'll come back more on that in a minute. So now we're in the start of 2025, and things aren't looking that great, especially with a lot of big name artists really concerned about these cloning tracks that are being released on TikTok and others. I remember seeing this, and I was quite amused when I saw these big artists that totally sold out to the music industry starting to complain that their likeness was being used without their without their permission. But I don't know, was it them or was it the music record companies? I don't know. I'm still kind of unsure of that. And so enter the US Copyright Office. Everyone started to really put pressure on them to come back with a report on what they thought. Positively, the US Copyright Office came back saying, if you create things with AI, you can't actually copyright them unless you can prove that there's been a certain amount of human creativity or human input into the creation of these tracks. And I think the music industry breathed a bit of a sigh of relief. So this first report, when it came out, I thought it was a really good decision because it was really dealing with two key questions. The whole fake Drake incident, solving that problem around artists retaining their likeness. And then the second thing that it looked at was that whole piece around AI generated work, like how much do you need to make it an original? And it seemed that the Copyright Office pretty much said that there needs to be a significant amount of human, there's that word again, intervention in the process. So, that I thought was a bit of a win. It was quite a good decision. There had already been a number of large lawsuits already against the likes of OpenAI and Anthropic. The major record labels didn't really like what was going on, and so they started to file their own lawsuits against the likes of Suno and Udio and Anthropic with pretty big sums of money to go after them for some kind of compensation for the training of their models based on copyrightable works. It's probably worth noting that Suno came back saying as a defense that it was fair use. They could legitimately take a copyrighted work, train the model because they were creating something new, something that was different from the original. The second decision around whether or not it was fair use by the courts in deciding a lot of these lawsuits with Anthropic and others was quite pivotal. So basically what the court said was that it wasn't fair use, and that was in the courts. But then we still had the Copyright Office and their determination and their report, which was still yet to come out. Then we started to see some other things creep in. The surprise announcement of Daniel Ek, the CEO for Spotify's investment in an AI weapons company, actually caused quite a bit of backlash with a number of artists leaving the platform in protest. So this whole thing around the AI weapons that the CEO for Spotify is invested in is just crazy. And I don't understand how others aren't really perplexed about this, because just think about it, all of our listening and all of the royalties, all the payments have basically gone to make weapons, which is the opposite of music. And I don't know if people actually are aware of this, and if they were, I don't know, do they care? It's crazy, right? So now fast forward to where we are now. Some of the latest news is top music attorney Ms. Crystal announced a class action lawsuit against Suno and Udio on behalf of independent artists, which was quite positive given that the major record labels could well do a deal with some of these large AI music generation platforms and cut indies completely out with no compensation whatsoever. I have to really tip my hat to Miss Crystal on this one. I think it's absolutely amazing. Like the fact that she's rallying people together and fighting for independent artists. I think, there's this whole movement that I'm starting to see form, which is really pro DIY or do it yourself, for independent music artists who are basically looking at a music industry that isn't really giving them anything, and they're off, fighting the good fight. And I think it's really exciting to see this kind of stuff happen. Enter the Velvet Sundown. This band was originally released as a real verified artist on Spotify's platform. It was later discovered that actually they were AI. It took them a little while, but eventually they came clean, stating that they were actually an AI band. The concern here, though, was that Spotify, their terms of service, state that artists shouldn't engage in deceptive behavior. And so there was a lot of uproar that this band, who is clearly AI, was promoting themselves as a real artist, getting streams and getting added to playlists, Discover Weekly and all of that by Spotify. Yet they shouldn't realistically be getting any royalties because that works to dilute the pool of royalty revenue that's available for real artists. And so that really pissed off a lot of the music industry as well. I'm kind of looking at this whole thing around, AI music and maybe the answer is that we start to flood Spotify with a whole bunch of AI music that we generate, and maybe they'll pay us a ton of streams. That's what I thought when I first saw this. I'm like, okay, if they're gaming the system and getting away with it, maybe we all should. Maybe we should all just publish a bunch of stuff with one of the AI generation platforms and just flood Spotify. At least we'd have good taste. But then I thought, no, that can't be the answer.
American artificial intelligence, and it will make America richer, stronger, greater, freer, and more powerful.
Meanwhile, drama in the US Copyright Office kicks off with Shira Permita, the Librarian of Congress, issuing a draft report saying that these large AI companies can't actually use copyrighted works as far as training their models. Now, the defense, as we said, was that they're allowed to do that because it's fair use, i.e. they're allowed to use that data to create a transformed work. Well, that wasn't the opinion of the Copyright Office. They released this draft report. But then what happens is that the Librarian of Congress gets fired by the federal government, Trump's government. Then she comes back saying that she was illegally fired and actually sues the federal government for illegal firing. So that's all kicking off. It's going to be an interesting one to watch. On the one hand, you've got rights holders who have a legitimate right to their copyrighted works, and on the other hand, you've got these big tech companies wanting to use that as training data. So, look, this one's up in the air, but let's watch this closely. So remember Timbaland? Well, as far as some of his promotion efforts in his partnership with Suno, he went on this big kind of online live webinar style set of promotion activities, and as part of these online tutorials that he was doing, he actually used a bunch of beats that were generated by different indie artists and passed them off as sort of being crafted by Suno, and he was like, this is amazing, and basically resulted in a bunch of heat. So many people in the music industry went online, and the actual indie artists themselves even were found commenting on how unfair it was that he basically had used their beats and said that it had actually come from Suno when it hadn't. Anyway, there was all this controversy, so that really didn't end well. And as far as Timbaland's reputation, it really got quite damaged, as well as Suno's. And yeah, so that really didn't go as well as I guess people had hoped. I thought this was also quite interesting that Timbaland actually had to apologize and he issued a statement. I mean, hats off to him. He was caught out, right? And it was so obvious. I mean, he basically recorded himself doing it. So it was pretty blatant. But then it kind of begs the question, if he wasn't recording himself and he wasn't doing it live online, would he have apologized for it? I don't know. But it kind of just brings up one of the ethical issues. I think the other good thing that happened here was the industry kind of really rose up again and fought back. And again, I think that's another really positive thing. We're starting to again see that independent music movement or revolution, if you will, starting to happen.
So where is the music industry set to go in the coming years? Well, this is a pretty tough question, and I guess all I can do is look at some of the experts. So the collective management organization, CMOs in Europe, did a big report, and what they predicted was that the global market for generative AI music will exceed 3 billion by 2028, which is a 10-fold increase from 2025. The study found that a great deal of concern among composers and other music rights holders about AI will mean for artists' incomes, their incomes will probably go down. Not that they were making that much to begin with. That kind of leaves a lot of the major record labels. They're probably going to do deals with Suno and Udio and leverage their rights holdings and their market dominance to do some kind of deal like they did back when Napster was in town, and they ended up doing big deals with Spotify and Apple Music. They'll probably do the same thing with these new AI generation platforms. So for indie artists, I guess it's going to be pretty bleak to begin with, unless indie artists are able to really come up with a little bit like craft beer, if you will, for the music industry, something that's very unique and tailored that people can't actually get through AI music generators. They'll have to be fairly unique. That's probably the only way that they're likely to survive. If we looked at the potential shortfall for music creators, it could be in France and Germany alone as much as 950 million euros, and that's how much they stand to lose.
This report also published, the size of the music industry, and even though the 950 million looks quite big and scary, at the end of the day, it's only France and Germany, right? There's way more money that's going to be lost around the world. But that's not the full story. A lot of these rights and royalties are held by major record companies. So in a way, you kind of see industry again shaping the narrative. The portion of independent music is nowhere near as big. And I think, again, this is kind of the music industry kind of looking after itself and trying to be a little bit protectionist, if we're really honest with ourselves. But one thing I do think is that it also provides independent artists with an opportunity to be different. Because at the end of the day, AI is training on everything that has happened before and not what is going to happen. So it really gives musicians an opportunity to be unique. But the question is, will it happen? Will it be on the fringes? Will it be hidden within subcultures? I don't know. And the question is, I think it's always kind of been like that, right? Alternative music was alternative for a reason. It was alternative to the mainstream. So maybe this is just a reflection of the same thing.
What's interesting is the use of AI in music will vary quite a lot depending on the genre and category. It's probably going to be most common in electronic music, naturally, just because it's much easier to replicate with an AI generator. It's probably going to exist in hip-hop as well, quite dominantly, and in advertising placements and advertising music, as well as background and stock music. Those, I guess, are the areas where pretty quickly AI is going to be able to assert some dominance. Some of the genres, I guess, if you're an indie and you're thinking about where you might find some kind of safe ground, rock and roll is harder to replicate with AI, just in terms of getting that really high quality sound. So that's going to be hopefully an area where, it'll stay fairly true to the genre. Same with acoustic music. That's also quite hard to replicate without it having a really produced and potentially unauthentic sound. So that's another area where indie artists might be able to forge a living. I'll leave you with this quote from Dr. Tobias Holzmuller from Gemma. Authors need transparency and control over the use of their works, but most importantly, they need a fair share of the revenues. And I guess that kind of sums it up. We'll have to just watch what happens. There's so many things right now that are still in question, and we're just gonna have to see how this plays out over the coming months and years. Hopefully just focus as musicians on our art and on the importance of authenticity.